"That's just the background guy," my brother said, and pointed at my husband Kyle the way you point at furniture. Not unkindly, not with malice, just with the casual authority of a man who has never questioned his own map of who matters in a room and has therefore never had reason to revise it. 100 people heard it. I know because I counted them earlier that afternoon when I was setting the table arrangement, and the garden holds sound the way it holds warmth, completely, in every direction at once. Kyle smiled.
He didn't speak.
He had a glass of sparkling water in his right hand, and he took a slow sip from it and looked out across the terrace at the string lights beginning to come on in the garden, and his face was the face of a man who had heard worse things said about him in rooms full of more important people and had survived every single one of them without comment or adjustment. An hour later, the emcee picked up his notes and began reading the donor list aloud. He reached one name.
He paused.
He read it again. Every single person at my brother's table turned around at exactly the same moment. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it starts. My name is Nadia Osamensa. I am 33 years old. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, the second of 3 children, in a house where the rules of importance were established early and revised never. My brother Dominic is 4 years older than me. He is an investment banker at Whitmore Capital in Atlanta. The kind of job that announces itself before you finish asking the question, the kind of title that makes other men at parties stand a little straighter and pay a little more attention. He has the handshake, the watch, the car, and the particular conversational confidence of someone who has never once doubted that the room was arranged for his benefit. My younger sister Amara is a pediatric resident at Emory University Hospital. She is brilliant and overworked and genuinely good, and I love her with the straightforward ease of people who have never competed with each other. And then there is me. I studied fine arts at the Savannah College of Art and Design for 3 years before transferring to a business administration program at Georgia State. I finished my degree at 23, took a job at a small nonprofit doing grant writing and event coordination, and spent the next 2 years learning that I was good at making organizations run, but that I was doing it for organizations that were not mine. At 25, I started a corporate event production company. I named it Meridian Event Group. I will tell you what that means in a moment. But first, let me tell you about the summer I was 12 because it explains the shape of everything that came after it. My father, Winston Osamensa, retired in June of this year after 31 years as a senior structural engineer at Hargrove and Associates in Atlanta. He is 64 years old and in excellent health, and he has been talking about this retirement since I was in high school, and when it finally arrived, he wanted to celebrate it properly. 200 invitations went out. A venue was reserved, the Magnolia Terrace event space in Decatur, an outdoor garden venue with a covered pavilion, string lights, and a catering team my mother had been researching for 4 months. My mother called me in January to discuss the event. She called Dominic first, then Amara, then me. "We're thinking July 8th, she said. "Dominic is going to say a few words. Amara is going to do the toast. And we thought you could," a brief pause, the kind with history in it, "help coordinate the day of logistics. Since you do events." Day of logistics. For my father's retirement party. For an event at a venue I could have booked, designed, and produced in my sleep. "Of course," I said. Happy to help. I want to tell you about the summer I was 12 because it is the smallest version of that phone call, the original draft of it. My father came home from a conference in Chicago that August with 3 souvenirs. For Dominic, a Chicago Bulls cap that Dominic wore every day for 2 months. For Amara, a small stuffed bear from the Navy Pier gift shop that she named Gerald and kept on her dresser until she left for college. For me, a snow globe. A generic snow globe with a tiny skyline inside it that shook up into white flurry when you turned it over.
It was not a bad gift.
It was a nothing gift, the gift you buy in an airport when you have already bought the real ones and you notice on the way to the gate that you miscounted. I turned it over in my hands and the little white flakes settled over the tiny skyline, and I said thank you, and I meant it, and I set it on my windowsill, and for several years after that I would look at it and feel not bitterness exactly, but a kind of low, steady awareness. I am the one he thinks of last. I am not telling you this because I am still angry about a snow globe. I am telling you because the snow globe is the grammar of everything that followed. The phone calls made in a certain order, the introductions made a certain way, the seating charts and the speaking roles and the quiet, consistent, completely unconscious architecture of a family that had arranged itself around 2 children and fit the third one in where space allowed. You do not have to be cruel to cause that kind of damage. You only have to be incurious and consistent and completely certain that you already know what you have. Meridian Event Group. I started it at 25 with $11,000 in savings and a secondhand laptop and a dining room table that I used as both a desk and an eating surface for the first 18 months. In year 1, I had 2 clients, a nonprofit gala for a literacy organization in Midtown and a corporate holiday party for a mid-size accounting firm on Peachtree Street. I did both events almost entirely alone: the vendor calls, the floor plans, the catering logistics, the day of coordination, the invoicing afterward. I came home from the holiday party at midnight and sat at that dining room table with a glass of water and the signed contract copy in my hand and thought, I can do this. I had 11 clients in year 2. I hired my first full-time employee, a logistics coordinator named Priscilla, midway through year 3. Priscilla had come from a hotel events team, and she understood production the way I understood it, not as glamour, which is what civilians imagine event work to be, but as systems management. She became the second person I have ever trusted completely in a professional capacity, after Kyle. By year 4, Meridian was producing 40-plus events annually across the Atlanta metro. The client list had grown to include 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 major Atlanta arts institutions, a law firm with 7 regional offices, and the one I am most proud of, the annual fundraising gala for the Georgia Children's Hospital Foundation. That event was our largest production, and it had become the foundation's highest single-night fundraising total in their history, 3 years running. My family knew I had a business. My mother would sometimes describe it at church as Nadia does party planning, which was technically not wrong in the way that calling structural engineering building stuff is technically not wrong. My father knew I produced events. He had never attended one. He had never asked about the client list or the revenue or the Georgia Children's Hospital account or any of the specific things that would have told him what kind of company his daughter had built.
He knew I did events.
He asked me to handle day of logistics. I want you to understand that I am not angry about that anymore. I handled the day of logistics, and I handled them well, and my father's retirement party ran without a single problem because I knew exactly what I was doing, and that is its own complete satisfaction. But I want you to understand the geometry of it, the precision with which a family can deploy your capabilities while remaining entirely incurious about their scope. I met Kyle at a vendor event in 2019. He was there representing Veritas Systems, a mid-size Atlanta firm that built enterprise software for nonprofit financial management. He was the director of strategic partnerships, the person responsible for building the relationships that open new markets. He was also, as I discovered over the following months, one of the most quietly capable people I had ever been in a room with. The kind of person who reads a room within 30 seconds of entering it and never uses that reading to make anyone feel diminished by comparison. We married in 2021. Small ceremony in the Decatur Botanical Garden. 17 people. Lunch afterward at a restaurant on Ponce de Leon Avenue where the bread is good and the tables are far enough apart for actual conversation. My father gave a short speech, genuine, warm, the speech of a man who loved his daughter and wished her well and had not thought very carefully about who he was wishing her well with. My mother cried, which she does at every milestone regardless of scale. Dominic was at the far end of the table on his phone for most of the lunch and left before dessert to catch a flight to New York. Kyle was not what my family had expected. This was never stated. It was apparent in the small adjustments, the questions that were asked and the questions that were not asked, the conversational space that opened for Dominic and did not quite open for Kyle, the way my father would say, and how is work going to Kyle at family dinners in the same tone he used for my younger cousin, who was finishing community college.
Politely.
Without real curiosity. Kyle did not talk about his work the way Dominic talked about his. Dominic talked about his work the way some men carry their credentials, visibly at all times, so the room is never in doubt about what it is dealing with. Kyle talked about his work only when asked, and when asked he said enterprise software for health clinics and usually changed the subject.
He was not modest about it.
He was simply not interested in performing it. There is a difference. My family understood that he had a job in tech. They did not know what he had been building since 2020. In 2020, Kyle left Veritas and co-founded Anchor Health Technologies with a former colleague named Dennis Park. Anchor built compliance and financial management software specifically for community health centers and federally qualified health clinics, the chronically underfunded facilities serving low-income and uninsured patients in communities that have few other options. It was unglamorous, essential, infrastructure-level work, and it addressed a gap so specific and so persistently unaddressed that within 18 months of launch, Anchor had signed contracts with 47 health centers across 6 states. By the summer of my father's retirement party, Anchor Health Technologies was in 11 states, employed 31 people, and had been named to the Atlanta Business Chronicle's list of top Georgia healthcare technology companies for 2 consecutive years. Kyle had been profiled once, briefly, in a trade publication covering health center IT. The profile had not circulated in my family. No one had thought to look. I am not telling you this to brag on my husband. I am telling you because the facts of the matter are the whole story, and without them what follows is no weight. 3 weeks before the party, I almost called my mother and told her we were not coming. I had been running on 4 hours of sleep for 10 days. Meridian had 3 concurrent events in production: a corporate summit for a pharmaceutical firm, a gala for an arts foundation, and the Georgia Children's Hospital Foundation annual dinner, which was our largest account and required 2 full weeks of my attention in the month before the event. I was managing vendor contracts and floor plans and catering timelines at 11 o'clock at night, and somewhere in the middle of that 10th sleepless night, I picked up my phone and opened my mother's contact and held it. Kyle was at the kitchen table with his own laptop. He had seen me pick up the phone. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "We don't have to go." I set the phone down. I looked at him. I said, "Yes, we do."
Nadia.
"He's my father," I said. "I'm going." Kyle nodded once and went back to his laptop, and I put the phone down and went back to my floor plan, and neither of us said anything else about it. We went. July 8th arrived overcast and then cleared by mid-afternoon into the kind of Georgia summer evening that redeems all the months of unbearable heat, the light turning amber and long, the air cooling by 5 degrees at 6 o'clock, the garden at the Magnolia Terrace strung with lights that had not come on yet but hung there in the early evening like a promise being kept in slow motion. I had done the day of logistics, arrived at 2 in the afternoon, checked in each vendor, catering, florals, audio, the bar service, walked the pavilion floor plan with the venue manager and made 2 small adjustments to the table arrangement that improved the flow from the entrance to the main gathering space. Briefed Gerald Pickett, the emcee, on the evening sequence, welcome remarks, presentation of the framed architectural drawing, Dominic's speech, Amara's toast, the donor recognition segment, dessert service, open time. Handed Gerald the printed donor list. Made sure he had the pronunciation guide I had prepared for the names. I did all of this efficiently and without ceremony, the way I do every event. Then I changed into the burgundy dress in the venue's dressing room and went out to join the party as a guest. Nobody commented on the logistics work. Nobody was expected to. Kyle was waiting near the bar when I came out. He handed me a glass of white wine. He said, "Everything looked good?" And I said, "It always looks good," and he smiled, and we found a spot near the garden edge where the string lights were beginning to catch the changing light. We arrived at 5:30. The guests filtered in steadily. My father's former colleagues from Hargrove and Associates, neighbors from the Decatur House, friends from Mount Carmel Baptist, a scatter of family from Augusta and Macon who had driven in for the occasion. The garden filled with the comfortable noise of people who mostly knew each other and were happy to be somewhere beautiful on a July evening that had turned out, against reasonable expectation, to be bearable. My brother Dominic arrived at 6:15 with his wife Candace and 2 colleagues from Whitmore Capital. He was in a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who need you to notice that the suit fits. He moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who arrives into a room already certain of his position in it. He found Kyle and me near the garden edge. He hugged me, a quick, adequate hug, the hug of a brother who loves his sister from a comfortable conversational distance. He shook Kyle's hand once, a single pump, and turned immediately to say something to one of his colleagues. The conversation rolled away from us in Dominic's direction, as it always did, the way water rolls toward the lowest point in the room. I did not mind. I had a glass of good wine and Kyle's arm occasionally brushing mine, and the string lights beginning to glow gold in the early evening, and I was content to watch. I was talking with my father's former project manager, a man named George Hawthorne who had worked alongside my father for 22 years and who wanted to tell me, at length, about the structural challenges of a mixed-use project in Buckhead they had worked on in 2009, when I heard Dominic's voice carry across the terrace. I did not hear the full sentence at first. I heard the shape of it, the particular performing pitch, the audience laugh that followed. Then a gap. Then clearly, unmistakably, at the volume of a man who has no reason to lower his voice. That's just the background guy. And I looked across the terrace. Dominic was pointing at my husband, at Kyle, who was standing alone near the garden edge with his sparkling water, looking at the lights that had just come on fully in the darkening garden, and Dominic was saying it to Candace and his 2 colleagues and 2 neighbors who had gathered in his orbit the way things always gathered, and they were laughing. The soft, compliant laugh of people who are not sure if something is funny, but the person saying it is confident, and it costs nothing to agree. 100 people were in that garden. The Magnolia Terrace carries sound in the particular way of outdoor spaces with stone underfoot and still July air, farther than you expect, and in every direction at once.
Kyle heard it.
I know because his head turned, very slightly, in the direction of the sound, and then turned back to the lights. He took a sip of his water. He did not move from his spot. His face did not change, in any way that you could name or photograph. I stood across the terrace and held my wine glass and felt something go very still in the center of my chest. Not rage. Not the hot feeling. Something colder and more patient than that, the specific quiet of a person who has been keeping a long account and has just understood that the balance is about to settle on its own, without her having to do anything at all except stay in the room. I finished my conversation with George Hawthorne. I drank my wine. The evening continued around me with the beautiful indifference of a well-run event. At 7:15 my father was brought to the center of the pavilion by my mother and presented with a framed architectural drawing, one of his first major projects from 1994, the structural design for a mixed-use building on West Peachtree Street that was still standing, still in use, still recognizable as the work of a young engineer who had believed in the permanence of things. My father's eyes went red at the corners when he saw it. He is not a crier. He cleared his throat twice and said, "I've been a lucky man," and held the frame in both hands and looked at it for a long moment as though checking his own arithmetic. Dominic gave his speech. It was a genuinely good speech, fluent, warm, polished, the speech of a man who has given many speeches and knows what he is doing with one. He named my father's professional achievements with real specificity. He named the 31 years and the projects and the firm's reputation in the Atlanta commercial real estate market. He said, "Dad taught me that the work is the measure of the man." He received strong applause and received it with the practiced, modest nod of a man who expected it. Amara gave the toast. She was nervous and real and slightly too long and perfect in a way that genuine feeling is always slightly too long. She held her champagne glass in both hands the way she has held glasses since we were children, and she said, "You always showed up. For everything. Every single thing." Her voice broke on the word every. Everyone in the garden loved her for it. I loved her for it. And then Gerald Pickett took the microphone. Gerald is a professional. He has been emceeing corporate and fundraising events in Atlanta for 11 years. I have worked with him on 4 Meridian productions, and I have watched him navigate difficult rooms and technical problems and one memorable situation involving a missing keynote speaker, and he has never lost his composure. He is exactly the kind of person you want holding the microphone when you want an evening to go smoothly. He had no idea what he was about to do. "Before we move to dessert," Gerald said, with the warm authority that is his professional signature, "we want to take a moment to recognize the evening's sponsors and donors, whose generosity made this celebration possible." He looked down at the list I had printed for him that morning. I had prepared it from the contribution records my mother had given me. I had formatted it cleanly, name, affiliation, brief description where provided. I had read every name on it when I formatted it. I had seen Kyle's name. I had not told him it was there. He had not told me he had donated. He had simply done it, the way he did most things, quietly because he wanted to without announcement. Gerald read the first name. A neighbor. Applause. The second. A family friend. Applause. The third.
He stopped.
He looked at the card with the expression of a man who has just read a word he recognizes from a context he was not expecting. He looked at it again, a single-second recalibration, the kind that passes without remark in any other circumstance. Then he said, with a clean professional diction that is his habit, Anchor Health Technologies. Kyle Mensuose, founder and CEO. The garden went quiet. Not the silence of something wrong. The silence of 100 people processing a piece of information that has just reorganized something they thought they already understood. Gerald, who was simply doing his job, continued reading. Anchor Health Technologies is one of Georgia's leading healthcare compliance technology firms and a committed supporter of community health initiatives in the Atlanta metro. We are grateful for their generous contribution to this evening's celebration. He moved to the next name on the list. The room did not move with him. At Dominic's table, table 4, directly in front of the pavilion, 6 people, every single person turned around at the same moment. Turned toward the garden edge, where Kyle was standing in his navy blazer with his sparkling water, with the same expression he had worn all evening, present, unhurried, entirely disinterested in being looked at. Dominic's wife, Candace, put her hand on his arm and said something quietly. I watched his face change. Not dramatically. Dominic has too much practice for dramatic changes. But something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation happening in real time. The particular expression of a man revising a number he thought he knew. One of his colleagues picked up his phone. I watched him type something.
Search something.
I watched his expression when the results came back. My father turned from the pavilion and found Kyle across the garden. He looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man who is revising something large and doing it quietly, so no one sees the math. Then he walked across the garden with the purposeful stride of a structural engineer who has decided to inspect something more carefully than he did the first time. He put out his hand. Kyle shook it, firm, brief, no theater. My father said something I could not hear from where I was standing. Kyle nodded and said something back, and my father's expression shifted into the engineer's look, the one that appears when he has just understood a system he wasn't expecting to find. He put his hand briefly on Kyle's shoulder, and then he turned and found me across the garden. I raised my wine glass. He held my gaze for a long moment, long enough that several people near him noticed and looked in my direction and looked back at him. The look of a man who has just understood that the distance between where he thought his daughter stood and where she actually stood is larger than he had accounted for. The look of a man who drew a map a long time ago and is beginning to understand that the territory was never the map. Then he raised his glass. I did not manufacture what happened next.
I want to be precise about that.
Some things do not require you to build them. Some things build themselves, in front of 100 people with a microphone and a printed donor list and the simple honest fact of what your husband has spent the last 4 years creating in the world. I found Dominic at the dessert table at 8:30. Candace had gone to speak with my mother. His colleagues had drifted toward the bar. He was standing alone, placing a slice of pound cake on a small plate with the focused attention of a man working through something he does not yet want to put into words. He saw me coming. He did not look away. He said, Nadia.
Dominic.
A moment of quiet. Then, I didn't know about Kyle's company. I know you didn't. You could have mentioned it. I said, when was the last time you asked Kyle what he was working on? Not how are things, not how is the tech space, what he was specifically building. The thing that matters to him. Dominic looked at his plate. He did not answer.
For years, I said.
31 staff. 11 states. He doesn't talk about it the way you talk about your work because he is not interested in performing it. He is interested in doing it. I kept my voice level, not cold, not raised, just even, the way you speak when you want someone to hear the words and not the emotion underneath them. You called him the background guy. In front of 100 people. In front of me. Dominic looked up. I'm not ending anything, I said. I'm not cutting you off. You are my brother, and I love you, and that is not conditional. But I am telling you that the version of this family where you operate from a map you drew 20 years ago, the version where I coordinate the day of logistics and Kyle is the background guy, that version is done. I set my fork down on the edge of the table. I would prefer the version where you're curious. That version is available to you. I genuinely hope you take it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'll call Kyle this week. That's a start, I said. I took a piece of cake and walked back across the garden to where Kyle was standing with my father and two of my father's former colleagues from Hargrove and Associates who were asking him questions with the genuine focused curiosity of engineers who have encountered a systems problem they want to understand completely. I stood next to my husband. He looked at me, said quietly, Okay? Better than okay, I said. He put his arm around me. We ate cake in the warm July evening while the string lights made everything gold, and my father and his former colleagues took turns asking about health center procurement models, and Kyle answered every question with the patient, precise pleasure of a man who loves what he does and is never tired of explaining it to someone who genuinely wants to know. My father called me the next morning. He called at 8:45, which is early for my father, and when I picked up he said, I want to talk about last night. I said, Okay. He said, I want to understand what Kyle has built. I said, Ask him yourself. He'll answer. A pause. Then, will you both come to dinner? Sunday. Your mother wants to cook. Sunday works, I said. I handed the phone to Kyle, who was standing at the kitchen counter with his coffee. He took it and said, Winston, good morning. And then he listened for a while with the patient attention he gives to everything and said, Sunday is perfect. We'll bring the wine. He hung up and handed the phone back. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the kitchen window at the Decatur morning. He said, he wants to know how the health center procurement model works. Of course he does, I said. He's an engineer. It's a systems problem. Kyle smiled. Yeah, he said. It is. Sunday dinner was 3 hours long. My father asked questions the whole time, the focused sequential questions of an engineer who wants to understand a system end to end, how the software was architected, how the contracts were structured, how the health centers were found and onboarded, what the failure modes were, and how they were addressed. Kyle answered everything. He drew a diagram on a paper napkin at one point. My father kept the napkin. At the end of dinner, my mother put coffee on the table and my father leaned back in his chair and looked at Kyle the way he looks at things he has decided to take seriously, and he said, I should have asked sooner. Kyle said, You're asking now. Nadia too, my father said. He looked at me. I hear you coordinate big events for that hospital foundation. The Georgia Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, I said. 3rd year in a row. Biggest fundraising night of their year. He looked at me for a long moment, the look of a man who has been given new coordinates for something he thought he already knew how to find. He said, I didn't know that. I said, You didn't ask, Dad. He nodded. He heard it this time. Not as an accusation, as a fact, the specific factual weight of a thing that is simply true and requires acknowledgement before it can be moved past. He said, I'm asking now. I know, I said. So am I. We had coffee. My mother brought out a second round of dessert. My father and Kyle talked for another 45 minutes about healthcare infrastructure and community health center funding, and the particular gap in the market that Anchor had been built to fill, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation my father said something I did not expect. He said, I worked on the structural design for a clinic in Vine City in 1997. Small facility. Community health center. I always wondered if it was still open. Kyle took out his phone. He searched for a minute. He said, Vine City Community Health Center. Still open. Now operates under the federally qualified health center designation. He paused. They're actually in our target market for the next expansion phase. My father looked at the phone screen. He looked at it for a long time. He said, Well. Just that. Well. The single syllable of a man who has just understood something about the shape of things that he had not understood before. I was back at my desk at Meridian on Monday morning at 7:30. 2 new client inquiries had come in over the weekend. The Georgia Children's Hospital Foundation had sent a preliminary budget approval for next year's gala, our 4th year as their production partner. Priscilla had left a note on my keyboard that said, "Coffee is made and you're the best," in that order. I sat down. I opened the event management software. I pulled up the Q4 production calendar. 42 events between September and December. My name on every single one. I looked at the calendar for a moment. Then I opened the first file and started working. Drop an A in the comments if you have been the one in the room doing the real work. Drop a B if someone in your family finally asked. Drop a C if they still haven't. If this story genuinely connected with you, only if it genuinely did, consider subscribing. New stories every week.